High Admiral Vex-K'thara had seen many things in his 400 cycles of life. He had witnessed the collapse of 3 stellar empires, negotiated peace treaties with species so alien their thoughts moved through quantum frequencies, and once accidentally started a war by sneezing during a diplomatic dinner. But never, in all his years commanding the Galactic hegemony's most feared fleet, had he laughed so hard that his breathing apparatus malfunctioned. Earth, he wheezed, his multiple lung chambers struggling to process oxygen while his mandibles clicked in amusement. You want me to be concerned about Earth? The messenger, a nervous young Quintari named Blix-9, shifted his weight from one tentacle to another. His translator device crackled with static as he spoke. High Admiral, the Council of Worlds has classified the Sol system as a Class 7 threat level. They strongly recommend avoiding contact. Vex-K'thara's laughter echoed through the command bridge of his flagship, the inevitable Doom. Around him, his bridge crew joined in the merriment. Sub-Commander Yule Prime, a hulking Thaxian with arms like tree trunks, slapped his knee so hard the deck plating vibrated. Navigation Officer Quinn Beta nearly choked on her nutrient paste. Class 7? Vex-K'thara gasped, wiping bioluminescent tears from his compound eyes. That's the same classification we give to unstable quantum singularities. And you're telling me some backwater mudball in the galactic rim deserves the same respect as a collapsing star? Blix-9's color shifted to a deeper shade of purple, indicating extreme discomfort. Sir, the reports from our scout vessels indicate that the inhabitants of Earth, specifically the dominant species called humans, exhibit certain unusual characteristics. Oh, this keeps getting better. Vex-K'thara settled back into his command throne, a biomechanical construct that molded itself to his exoskeleton. Please, young Blix-9, enlighten us about these terrifying dirt dwellers. The messenger activated his data pad, its holographic display casting eerie shadows across his face. According to our intelligence, humans are persistence hunters. They can track prey across vast distances for days without stopping. So can half the species in the galaxy, yawned communications officer Zara 7, not looking up from her console. What else? They voluntarily subject themselves to extreme physical stress for entertainment purposes. They climb vertical rock faces without safety equipment, throw themselves from aircraft with primitive fabric wings, and engage in combat sports where the objective is to render their opponent unconscious. Sub-Commander Yule Prime snorted. Sounds like typical primitive behavior to me. What's next? They eat their own young. No, sir, they actually form strong emotional bonds with other species and keep them as companions. Some humans will risk their lives to save these pets, even when it provides no evolutionary advantage. The bridge fell silent for a moment. Then Vex-K'thara burst into fresh peals of laughter. Oh, wonderful. Not only are they suicidal maniacs, they're also sentimental fools. This gets better and better. Blix-9's color shifted again, this time to an alarming shade of chartreuse. There's more, sir. Humans have a concept they call holding the line. When faced with overwhelming odds, instead of retreating, they often choose to fight until death rather than abandon their positions or comrades. Sounds like an evolutionary dead end to me, chuckled Navigation Officer Quinn Beta. Natural selection should have weeded out that kind of stupidity eons ago. That's what our xenobiologists thought too, Blix-9 continued, his voice growing smaller. But somehow they've not only survived but thrived. They've colonized every continent on their planet, including areas with extreme temperatures, radiation and hostile wildlife. They've even begun preliminary space exploration. Vex-K'thara waved a dismissive claw. Primitive chemical rockets, no doubt. How adorably quaint. What's their technological level? Steam power? Nuclear fission? They've achieved fusion reactions, basic AI systems, and have successfully landed on their planet's natural satellite. Impressive for primitives, admitted Sub-Commander Yule Prime, but hardly threatening to a hegemony battle fleet. Blix-9's translator made a distressed whining sound. Sir, there's one more thing. The Council's report mentions something called human ingenuity. Apparently, when faced with impossible situations, humans have a tendency to create solutions that shouldn't theoretically work. Give me an example, Vex-K'thara said, his amusement beginning to fade into annoyance. During their global conflict designated as World War II, human engineers built an artificial harbor by sinking concrete ships. When their supply lines were cut, they invented new weapons using scrap metal and explosive materials meant for mining. When one of their aircraft was damaged beyond repair capability, the crew used duct tape and spare parts to create a functional replacement. Duct tape? Quinn Beta looked puzzled. What's duct tape? A primitive adhesive material apparently considered by humans to be a universal solution to most mechanical problems. The bridge crew exchanged glances. Communications officer Zara 7 finally looked up from her console. They fix complex machinery with sticky tape. According to the report, yes, and it works. Vex-K'thara felt the first tiny flutter of unease in his primary stomach. He quickly suppressed it. Ridiculous. No species can violate the fundamental laws of engineering with adhesive tape. The Council is obviously overreacting to primitive ingenuity. Perhaps, sir. But the report also mentions their mathematical capabilities. Humans have developed theoretical frameworks for space-time manipulation, quantum mechanics, and faster-than-light travel, all while still using chemical propulsion. Theoretical frameworks are meaningless without the technology to implement them, scoffed Sub-Commander Yule Prime. Any species can dream about conquering the stars. Blix-9's color had now shifted to a sickly yellow-green. The Council's final note mentions something called human determination. Apparently, when humans decide they want something, they rarely give up until they achieve it, even when the goal seems impossible. How touchingly naive, Vex-K'thara said. Their determination won't protect them from plasma cannons and quantum torpedoes. Sir, Blix-9's voice was barely a whisper now. The Council strongly recommends that any contact with Earth be conducted through diplomatic channels only. They suggest treating humans as a potential class or species. The bridge erupted in laughter again. Class or species were reserved for civilizations capable of galactic-level threats. The hegemony itself was barely Class B. At diplomatic channels, wheezed Vex-K'thara, for a species that hasn't even achieved interstellar flight. Oh, Blix-9, you've provided the best entertainment I've had in cycles. Sir, if I may, Navigation Officer Quinn Beta interrupted, we're currently only 3 parsecs from the Sol system. Our deep space sensors are picking up increased electromagnetic activity from the third planet. Increased activity. Vex-K'thara's amusement faded slightly. What kind of activity? Radio transmissions, mostly. Primitive entertainment broadcasts, communication networks, and what appears to be scientific data exchange. Nothing threatening, but the volume has increased by 300% in the last 50 Earth years. They're expanding their communication infrastructure, Sub-Commander Yule Prime observed. Standard sign of a developing civilization. Sir, Blix-9 interjected desperately. The Council's report specifically warns against underestimating human development speed. Apparently they've progressed from basic tool use to spaceflight in less than 10,000 of their years. 10,000 years? Vex-K'thara's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. That is unusually rapid. Most species take at least 50,000 years to achieve basic spaceflight, agreed Quinn Beta. The hegemony took nearly 200,000. And anomaly, dismissed Yule Prime. Probably environmental pressures forcing rapid adaptation. Blix-9's color had now shifted to an alarming shade of purple-black. Sir, there's one more detail in the report. Human literature and entertainment media frequently feature scenarios where small groups of humans defeat vastly superior opponents through cunning, determination, and sacrifice. Fiction, snorted Vex-K'thara. Every species creates fantasy stories about overcoming impossible odds. Yes, sir. But according to the Council's analysis, these stories accurately reflect human historical behavior patterns. They call it David and Goliath syndrome, meaning when faced with a larger, more powerful enemy, humans often focus their efforts on finding and exploiting that enemy's weaknesses rather than matching their strengths. An uncomfortable silence fell over the bridge. Finally, Communications Officer Zara 7 spoke up. "Sir, I'm detecting a transmission from Earth. It appears to be directed at us." Every head on the bridge turned toward her. "Directed at us?" Vex-K'thara's voice carried a note of surprise. "How is that possible?" "Our stealth systems are active." "Unknown, sir. The transmission is coming from a facility on Earth's North American continent. It's using a primitive radio frequency, but the message is—" She paused, her face cycling through several colors. "Sir, the message is in perfect Galactic Standard." The bridge fell dead silent. Galactic Standard was a constructed language used only by advanced spacefaring civilizations. No planet-bound species should know it existed. "Put it on speakers," Vex-K'thara commanded, his voice barely steady. Static filled the bridge, followed by a clear, confident human voice speaking flawless Galactic Standard with what could only be described as a slight smirk in the tone. "Greetings. High Admiral Vex-K'thara of the Hegemony flagship Inevitable Doom. This is Director Sarah Martinez of the Earth Defense Consortium. We've been monitoring your approach for the past 6 hours. We noticed you seemed to be having quite a discussion about our little planet. Would you like to chat?" The color drained from every face on the bridge. Sub-Commander Yule Prime's massive hands began trembling. Navigation Officer Quinn Beta dropped her nutrient paste container. The Communications Officer Zara 7 started making small whimpering sounds. Blix 9's color had shifted to pure black, indicating complete terror. Vex-K'thara stared at the communications console as if it had transformed into a venomous space serpent. His mind raced through the implications. Earth shouldn't have sensors capable of detecting a Hegemony stealth ship. They shouldn't know Galactic Standard. They definitely shouldn't know his personal identification. "Director Martinez," he said carefully, activating the response transmitter, "this is indeed High Admiral Vex-K'thara. How did you detect our vessel?" The human voice came back immediately, tinged with what sounded suspiciously like amusement. "Oh, Admiral, we've been expecting you for quite some time. The Council of Worlds sent us a very nice warning about possible contact attempts. They were quite insistent that we should be prepared for diplomatic discussions." "The Council warned you?" Vex-K'thara felt his secondary heart skip a beat. "Of course. They were very thorough in their briefing about Hegemony protocols, ship classifications and command structure. Lovely people, very professional. They also mentioned that some Hegemony commanders might not take their recommendations seriously." Sub-Commander Yule Prime leaned over and whispered urgently, "Sir, how did the Council establish contact with Earth without our knowledge?" Before Vex-K'thara could respond, Director Martinez continued. "Admiral, we understand you might have some concerns about our capabilities. Would you prefer to conduct this conversation in person? We have a nice facility prepared for interspecies meetings. Or, if you'd prefer, we could meet in neutral space. We have a few ships that could rendezvous with you." "Ships?" Vex-K'thara's voice cracked slightly. "What kind of ships?" "Oh, nothing too fancy. Just some vessels we've been working on based on theoretical frameworks our scientists developed. Fusion-powered, basic artificial intelligence, quantum communication arrays. You know, the usual primitive stuff." Navigation Officer Quinn Beta's tentacles were now wrapped tightly around her console for support. "Sir," she whispered, "I'm detecting 3 objects approaching from the direction of Earth. They're moving at approximately 15% light speed." 15%? Vex-K'thara's compound eyes nearly popped out of his skull. "That's impossible. They don't have the technology for relativistic travel." "Oh, we don't," Director Martinez's voice carried clear amusement now. We just got creative with some duct tape and quantum field manipulation. Amazing what you can accomplish when you really put your mind to it. The bridge of the inevitable doom had become a tableau of terror. Every crew member sat frozen in place, staring at their instruments in growing horror. The three objects on the long-range sensors were definitely artificial, definitely under intelligent control, and definitely approaching at speeds that should have been impossible for a pre-interstellar civilization. Director Martinez, Vex-K'thara said, his voice carefully controlled, "Perhaps we should discuss this situation in more detail." "I'd be delighted, Admiral. Should we schedule a meeting?" "I should mention we have representatives from several other Earth nations who would like to participate. And I believe the Council of Worlds is sending an observer as well." "An observer?" "Yes, Ambassador Trix Omega. Charming individual, very diplomatic. He's been helping us understand galactic politics and proper first contact protocols. Fascinating stuff, really." Vex-K'thara's mind reeled. Ambassador Trix Omega was the Council's most senior diplomatic representative, reserved for only the most critical negotiations. If he was personally involved with Earth, then the Council wasn't just recommending caution. They were treating humans as equals. "Sir," Sub-Commander Yule Prime whispered urgently, "the approaching vessels have just signaled us. They're requesting permission to escort us to a diplomatic meeting point." "Escort us?" Vex-K'thara's voice was barely a squeak. "Admiral." Director Martinez's voice carried a note of gentle concern. "I should probably mention that our sensors indicate your ship's weapons systems are currently armed. While we understand this might be standard procedure, it does make some of our more nervous colleagues a bit uncomfortable. Would you mind powering down your offensive capabilities? Just as a good faith gesture." Every eye on the bridge turned to Vex-K'thara. The inevitable doom carried enough firepower to sterilize a planet. Its quantum torpedoes could crack continental plates. Its plasma batteries could vaporize a moon. And a species that shouldn't even know they existed was politely asking them to turn off their weapons. Of course, Vex-K'thara heard himself saying, "Weapons systems, stand down to safe mode." "Thank you, Admiral. That's very considerate. Now then, shall we discuss the terms of this first contact? I have to warn you, our legal department has prepared quite an extensive list of topics they'd like to cover. Humans are very thorough when it comes to contracts and agreements. As the weapons systems powered down with electronic whines and mechanical clicks, Vex-K'thara realized that everything he thought he knew about the galaxy had just been turned upside down. The Council hadn't been overreacting. They had been terrified. 3 hours later, High Admiral Vex-K'thara found himself sitting in what humans called a conference room aboard the Earth vessel Persistence. The name alone should have been a warning sign, but like everything else about this situation, he had completely missed the implications until it was too late. The human ships had been impressive. Not in the overwhelming way of hegemony dreadnoughts, but in a distinctly unsettling manner that made his tactical officers break out in nervous sweats. They looked like someone had taken conventional spacecraft designs and asked a particularly creative child to make them better with unlimited resources, a complete disregard for engineering safety standards. Director Sarah Martinez sat across from him, a middle-aged human female with graying hair and eyes that seemed to find everything slightly amusing. Next to her sat General Robert Hayes, a stern-faced military officer whose presence suggested this wasn't entirely a diplomatic mission. Ambassador Trix Omega, the Council representative, occupied a specially designed chair that accommodated his crystalline body structure and multiple appendages. So Director Martinez began, folding her hands on the polished table surface. "I understand there might have been some confusion about Earth's current status in galactic affairs." Vex-K'thara's translator struggled with the human's tone. Was she being diplomatic or mocking? With humans, it seemed, the two were often indistinguishable. "There appears to have been a communication error," he replied carefully. The hegemony was not informed that Earth had achieved interstellar capabilities or established diplomatic relations with the Council. Ambassador Trix Omega's crystalline features shifted in what his species considered a diplomatic smile. Actually, Admiral, Earth hasn't achieved interstellar capabilities in the traditional sense. They've simply bypassed several technological prerequisites through what they call creative problem solving. Creative problem solving. Sub-Commander Yule Prime, who had insisted on attending the meeting despite his obvious terror, leaned forward nervously. General Hayes spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. We noticed that most galactic civilizations follow very predictable development patterns. Chemical rockets, nuclear fission, fusion power, antimatter containment, then faster than light travel. Very methodical. Very safe. Very boring, Director Martinez added with a grin that made Vex-K'thara's primary stomach clench. Humans, General Hayes continued, prefer shortcuts. Why spend centuries developing antimatter containment when you can create artificial wormholes using quantum field manipulation and really good timing? Timing? Navigation Officer Quinn Beta squeaked. Oh yes, it's all about precision. Miss the window by even a nanosecond and you end up scattered across several dimensions. But get it right, and you can fold space-time like origami. Ambassador Trix Omega's translator made distressed, clicking noises. I should mention that human shortcuts violate approximately 732 known laws of physics. Known laws, Director Martinez corrected cheerfully. We've discovered that the universe is much more flexible than most species realize. You just have to ask nicely. Ask nicely? Vex-K'thara felt reality slipping away from him like sand through his claws. Figure of speech, General Hayes said. What we actually do is apply massive amounts of energy in precisely calculated patterns while hoping our mathematical models are correct. And if they're wrong? Well, Director Martinez shrugged. Then we learn something new about physics and try again. Assuming we survive, of course. Communications Officer Zara 7 made a small whimpering sound. You experiment with forces that could destroy your entire solar system. Only on Tuesdays, Director Martinez replied. We're very safety conscious about scheduling our potentially catastrophic experiments. Vex-K'thara stared at her, searching for any sign that she was joking. He found none. Ambassador Trix Omega shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Perhaps we should discuss the matter that brought us together. Admiral, the Hegemony has been conducting unauthorized reconnaissance of Earth for several months. Routine survey operations, Vex-K'thara protested weakly. Including detailed scans of our military installations, communication networks and industrial facilities, General Hayes added. His tone remained conversational, but something in his eyes suggested that routine was not how he would describe it. The Hegemony conducts preliminary assessments of all systems in our operational area, Sub-Commander Yule Prime said, trying to sound official. Standard protocol for maintaining galactic security. Director Martinez nodded knowingly. Galactic security. And how's that working out for you? The question hung in the air like a toxic gas cloud. Vex-K'thara realized with growing horror that he didn't have a good answer. The Hegemony's massive fleets, advanced technology, and overwhelming military superiority suddenly seemed less impressive when faced with a species that treated the laws of physics as suggestions. The Hegemony maintains peace and order throughout known space, he said, falling back on official doctrine. Known space, General Hayes repeated. Interesting phrase. How much of the galaxy would you say the Hegemony actually controls? Approximately 47% of mapped systems, Quinn Beta answered before anyone could stop her. And how many species are members of the Hegemony by choice rather than conquest? Another uncomfortable silence. Ambassador Trix Omega's crystalline features began cycling through colors that indicated extreme diplomatic distress. The Hegemony provides protection and stability, Vex-K'thara said, but his voice lacked conviction. Protection from what? Director Martinez asked. Other species like yourselves. There are many threats in the galaxy. Pirates, rogue AI systems, unstable civilizations. Unstable civilizations, General Hayes mused. Like species that might develop weapons capable of destroying planets and then use them to enforce their will on smaller, weaker neighbors. Vex-K'thara felt his breathing apparatus malfunction again, but this time from anxiety rather than laughter. The hegemony's weapons are used only when necessary to maintain order. Of course they are, Director Martinez said. And I'm sure your definition of necessary is very reasonable and completely unbiased. Ambassador Trix Omega made a sound like crystalline wind chimes in a hurricane. Perhaps we should focus on the current situation. Admiral, the Council of Worlds has decided to recognize Earth as a sovereign system under galactic law. That's impossible, Vex-K'thara protested. Earth hasn't met the basic requirements for system sovereignty. They lack interstellar capability, standardized technology, and political unity. About that, Director Martinez said, pulling out a small device that looked suspiciously like a human communication tablet. We've made some progress on those fronts. The device projected a holographic display showing the Sol system. But instead of the single inhabited planet that should have been there, the display showed bustling activity throughout the system. Space stations orbited every major celestial body. Mining operations extracted resources from asteroids. What looked like massive construction projects were underway in the outer planets. When? Vex-K'thara whispered. We've been busy, General Hayes said. Turns out that once you figure out how to manipulate space-time, moving large amounts of material and personnel becomes much easier. The political unity requirement, Director Martinez continued, was resolved last month when the United Nations established the Earth Defense Consortium with authority over all off-world operations. And the technology standardization requirement, General Hayes added, was waived by the Council after we demonstrated our alternative approaches to common problems. Ambassador Trix Omega's color had shifted to a pale blue, indicating resignation. The demonstration involved constructing a functional faster-than-light communication network using principles that our best scientists still don't understand. Oh, that, Director Martinez waved dismissively. Basic quantum entanglement manipulation. Any species can do it once they stop thinking of particles as discrete objects and start treating them as probability waves that can be convinced to maintain coherent states across arbitrary distances. Convinced? Sub-Commander Yule Prime's voice cracked. Well, technically we apply specific electromagnetic frequencies that encourage quantum coherence, but convinced sounds friendlier. Vex-K'thara realized that his worldview was not just cracking but actively dissolving. Everything the hegemony believed about technological development, military superiority, and galactic dominance was being casually dismantled by a species that treated scientific impossibilities as minor inconveniences. Admiral General Hayes said, his tone becoming more serious, we need to discuss the hegemony's future relationship with Earth and the Council of Worlds. What kind of discussion? Vex-K'thara asked, though he was beginning to suspect he wouldn't like the answer. The kind where we explain why your military expansion into this sector of the galaxy needs to stop, Director Martinez said, her cheerful demeanor finally showing some steel underneath. The hegemony has legitimate security interests, General Hayes corrected. Past tense. Your security interests are now balanced against the interests of other species who might prefer not to be conquered. You can't seriously suggest that Earth could challenge the hegemony militarily, Yule Prime sputtered. We have thousands of ships, millions of troops, weapons that can crack planets. And we have 3 ships that shouldn't be able to exist, and a really bad attitude about bullies, Director Martinez replied. Want to test which approach works better. The threat was delivered with such casual confidence that Vex-K'thara felt his exoskeleton begin to vibrate with suppressed terror. This wasn't bravado or bluffing. This was a species that had already demonstrated their ability to rewrite the rules of engagement simply by ignoring them. What are you proposing? He asked. Ambassador Trix Omega leaned forward, his crystalline features reflecting the room's lighting in complex patterns. The Council of Worlds is implementing a new framework for galactic governance, one based on mutual cooperation rather than military dominance, and species that don't want to cooperate, Yul Prime asked, are welcome to try their luck against humanity's approach to problem solving, General Hayes said. We've been looking forward to a good challenge. Director Martinez activated her tablet again. The holographic display now showed a map of the local galactic region. Red markers indicated hegemony-controlled systems. Blue markers showed council worlds, and scattered throughout, like seeds of something new and terrifying, were green markers labeled human interest zones. We've been busy establishing diplomatic relations, Director Martinez explained. Turns out that a lot of species are very interested in alternatives to hegemony membership. You've been contacting our client states. Vex-K'thara's voice rose to a near shriek. Former client states, General Hayes corrected. Amazing how quickly political situations can change when people have options. The display zoomed in on specific systems. Vex-K'thara recognized them as some of the hegemony's most important resource worlds and strategic positions. The green markers were spreading like an infection, converting red to blue with alarming speed. This is an act of war, he whispered. No, Director Martinez said, her voice becoming cold as interstellar space. This is an act of liberation. War is what happens when you try to stop us. You're one planet against a galactic empire. We're one planet that doesn't care about your empire's rules, General Hayes replied. And we've made friends with everyone you've been oppressing for the last few centuries. Ambassador Trix Omega's translator made apologetic sounds. Admiral, I'm required to inform you that the Council of Worlds has voted to impose economic sanctions on the hegemony pending a full review of your expansion policies. Economic sanctions. Vex-K'thara laughed, but it sounded hollow even to his own ears. The hegemony is economically self-sufficient, Director Martinez corrected, before humanity introduced certain technological improvements to your former trading partners. Improvements that make hegemony manufacturing look rather primitive. The holographic display shifted again, showing trade flow charts. The economic networks that had sustained the hegemony for millennia were rapidly restructuring themselves around new technological standards that bypassed traditional supply chains entirely. You're destroying galactic civilization as we know it, Yul Prime accused. We're improving it, General Hayes replied. Turns out that when you remove the threat of military conquest, species become much more creative and cooperative, and much more willing to share technological innovations, Director Martinez added. We've learned so much from our new friends. They've learned quite a bit from us too. Vex-K'thara's mind raced through the implications. If humanity was sharing their impossible technologies with other species, if they were building a coalition based on voluntary cooperation rather than military dominance, if they were actively working to undermine hegemony control, what do you want from us? He asked. Nothing, Director Martinez said. That's the point. We don't want your territory, your resources, or your submission. We just want you to stop taking those things from everyone else. And if we refuse? General Hayes smiled, and Vex-K'thara realized that humans could make facial expressions far more terrifying than any alien threat display he had ever encountered. Then you'll find out why the Council of Worlds classified humanity as a Class 7 threat. But you told us that was ridiculous. We thought it was, Ambassador Trix Omega said quietly, until we saw what humans consider reasonable defensive measures. The meeting ended 30 minutes later with the signing of documents that effectively ended the hegemony's expansion into the local galactic region. Vex-K'thara signed because the alternative was testing humanity's definition of defensive measures, and he had developed a strong suspicion that human defensive capabilities were proportional to their creativity in all other areas. As the inevitable doom departed Earth space under escort from 3 impossible human vessels, Vex-K'thara sat in his command chair and contemplated the collapse of everything he had believed about the galaxy. Sir, Communications Officer Zara 7 said quietly, "We're receiving a transmission from Hegemony Command. They want a full report on our encounter with Earth." Vex-K'thara considered his options. He could tell his superiors the truth, that a single planet had systematically dismantled their political, economic, and military assumptions using nothing but creative problem-solving and an apparent immunity to the concept of impossibility. He could explain that humanity had formed a coalition of willing allies rather than conquered subjects, and that this coalition was rapidly making the hegemony's approach to galactic governance obsolete. Or he could resign his commission and find a nice quiet planet where he could spend his remaining years pretending that the universe still made sense. "Tell them," he said finally, "that the Council's warning about Earth was accurate. I recommend immediate diplomatic contact and full compliance with human requests." "Sir?" "No." "And Zara 7? Start learning human languages. I have a feeling we're going to need them." Behind them, Earth continued its rotation, looking for all the world like an ordinary blue-green planet in an unremarkable solar system. But appearances, as Vex-K'thara had learned, could be devastatingly deceptive. Somewhere in the depths of space, the hegemony's thousand-year empire was crumbling not because of military defeat or technological superiority, but because humanity had introduced a revolutionary concept to galactic politics. What if governance was based on cooperation instead of conquest? It was, Vex-K'thara reflected, the most human solution imaginable. Completely impossible, utterly impractical, and absolutely unstoppable.